Hello and welcome to yet another edition of a World Panorama. All the biggest international news stories that made headlines this week are coming up in the next 30 minutes. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Let us begin the program with the headlines. Brunei enacts new Islamic criminal laws, including measures that make gay sex and adultery punishable by stoning to death. West, right organizations, United Nations condemn new barbaric laws. Situation in Libya deteriorates as General Haftar tells a self-styled national army to capture capital Tripoli. West-backed Prime Minister Siraj calls it an escalation. UN, the US and European nations call for calm. After 20 years of rule, Algerian leader Bouteflika resigns following weeks of massive street protests. Bouteflika had already dropped plans to seek a fifth term as opposition to his rule grew. And the UK and EU move to lengthen timetable for Brexit negotiations to reduce prospect of Britain exiting the bloc without a deal. May holds cross-party talks with opposition's Jeremy Corbyn to agree on a Brexit deal that UK Parliament has rejected 3 times. The top story: despite international condemnation, Brunei has enacted new Islamic criminal laws. Now, these include harsh anti-LGBT measures that make gay sex punishable by stoning to death. The implementation of the draconian penal code is a part of the predominantly Muslim country's rollout of Sharia law. The country's Sultan had implemented the first batch of laws in 2014, and this second phase covers offences punishable by amputation or by death. The barbaric laws have been condemned by the Western countries and right organizations as well as the United Nations.
Brunei has introduced strict new Islamic laws. The new Islamic criminal laws that were introduced on Wednesday include harsh anti-LGBT measures that make gay sex punishable by stoning to death. Offences such as adultery, rape, sodomy, robbery and insult or defamation of Prophet Muhammad will also carry the maximum penalty of death. The new measures also cover a range of other crimes, including punishment for theft by amputation. Brunei's move has raised eyebrows worldwide.
We are a country that prides itself on being inclusive, on defending human rights. Obviously, the moves that they have made go fly in the face of both our opposition to the death penalty, but also our principles around inclusion and human rights.
Brunei's gay community has expressed shock and fear at the medieval punishments. Homosexuality was already illegal in Brunei and punishable by up to 10 years in prison. But the move makes Brunei the 7th country in the world to impose death penalty for the same-sex relationships. LGBT activists waved rainbow flags and held protests outside Sultan of Brunei's London home after the announcement.
My name is Lewis Cox and I'm a Labour Party councillor here in Ealing. On Wednesday, 3rd of April, Brunei will see new laws introduced which will condemn homosexual sex with death. Gay people will be stoned to death after Wednesday for being who they are.
It's not the first time that Islamic law is being introduced in Brunei. The country first introduced Sharia law in 2014, giving it a dual legal system with both Sharia and common law. This was the first phase that covered crimes punishable by prison sentences and fines. This is now the final 2 phases, which cover crimes punishable by amputation and stoning. Despite criticism for Sharia laws, Sultan of the country says that Brunei was a fair and happy nation.
Akan beroleh pengalaman manis.
This is MIV system, the country's ideology, Malay Islamic monarchy, a successful, sacred concept of a fair and happy nation, where its people are united. System MIV has proven to be very friendly to the world.
Dari itu, ia bukanlah Brunei.
Countries and rights organizations around the world have condemned Brunei's new laws. The UN Human Rights Chief called the changes as that breach international human rights law. The US, Australia, the UK, France and Germany have also voiced objections.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling on the government of Brunei to stop bringing into effect a law on Wednesday that would provide the death penalty for a broad number of offences, including adultery, same-sex consensual sex between homosexuals, as well as introducing flogging and amputations as cruel and inhuman punishments for various offences.
In response to the new harsh laws, Hollywood actor George Clooney has called for a boycott of hotels connected with the ruler of Brunei. Other celebrities have joined George Clooney's call for blacklisting Brunei-linked accommodations. However, despite international condemnation, Brunei has doubled down. A statement by the Prime Minister's office saying that the law only deters acts that are against the teachings of Islam and rather educates and protects the legitimate rights of all individuals and the society. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And the United Nations has also expressed a strong concern over situation in Libya due to the advance being made by the forces of a military organization towards capital Tripoli. Ever since the long-time ruler Muammar Gaddafi was ousted in the 2011 Arab Spring pro-democracy movement, Libya has been split between the interim government in the west and the military organization in the east. The government based in Tripoli is headed by Prime Minister Faiz al-Sarraj and another in the east which is allied with General Khalifa Haftar. Now, UN Chief Antonio Guterres says that the movement of Haftar's forces towards Tripoli puts at risk the coming peace talks brokered by the UN that are aimed at drawing a roadmap for new elections. Concerns growing over situation in Libya. This as forces of a military organization are moving towards Tripoli. Khalifa Haftar ordered his eastern military forces to advance on capital Tripoli, taking his conflict with the internationally recognized government to a dangerous new level. Haftar's forces have moved on the capital from several sides. In response, opposing armed groups from the coastal city of Misrata have started moving towards Tripoli to defend it. People are afraid that if Haftar's forces enter Tripoli, they will engage in military confrontations with the local armed groups and there could be another war.
We do not want the return of military rule and a new dictatorship. We want a civil state with a constitution and a sovereignty that respects the law.
The developments mark a dramatic escalation of a power tussle that has dragged on in Libya since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The country has been divided between the Western-backed government in Tripoli and a parallel administration allied to Haftar. The developments are also a setback for the United Nations and Western countries, which have been trying to mediate between Prime Minister Faiz al-Sarraj and Haftar, who met in Abu Dhabi last month to discuss a power-sharing deal. Haftar enjoys the backing of Egypt and the UAE, which see him as a bulwark against Islamists. His opponents see him as a new Gaddafi. Haftar's march towards capital comes at a time when UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited the North African country and expressed fears of a new confrontation.
Very clearly, our business in not escalation is de-escalation. And I strongly hope that we will witness a de-escalation, both military and verbal, allowing for the recognition that Libya needs a political solution, not a military one.
Libya remains a battleground 8 years after Gaddafi revolt. PM Sarraj is backed by the West, but he relies on patches of armed groups with flexible loyalties. He has called Haftar's eastern advance an escalation. The rising tensions came as the United Nations is preparing to hold a conference later this month in the southwestern city of Gadames to discuss a political solution to prepare the country for long-delayed elections and avoid a military showdown. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. On 9th of April, voters will decide whether Benjamin Netanyahu will remain Prime Minister of Israel. The national election comes 5 weeks after Israel's Attorney General announced plans to indict Netanyahu on charges stemming from a year-long corruption investigation. Despite the allegations, Netanyahu could become the country's longest-serving Prime Minister if re-elected. He remains popular, but faces a strong challenge from the former army chief Benny Gantz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's face beams down from election billboards depicting him as a statesman, shaking hands with US President Donald Trump. As Israelis prepare to vote on 9th of April in the most closely watched election in years, posters like these are seen everywhere. Netanyahu's ardent supporters in Jerusalem marketplace hail him as King Bibi ahead of the ballot.
I would vote for Bibi Netanyahu. People always want to topple him and do various things to make him fall. Bibi has the best ability to talk in front of world nations. He is admired, he is loved, he is successful no matter what. Only Bibi Netanyahu.
Love him or loathe him, the election is all about Netanyahu. Although the names of parties will be on ballot papers, the vote will amount to a referendum on Netanyahu in the shadow of his legal woes. If he wins, he will become Israel's longest-serving prime minister this summer. Opinion polls show Netanyahu running neck and neck with former military chief Benny Gantz, who heads a centrist party.
Despite the investigations and everything, we support Bibi.
Meanwhile, Israelis are also watching events in Gaza unfold ahead of the polling. Cross-border tensions have been ticking up over the past year. 25th of March saw a new escalation when a long-range rocket launched from the Gaza Strip struck a house in central Israel, wounding 7 people in the first such incidents since the 2014 war in the Palestinian enclave. The early morning attack on Mishmeret, a small community north of Tel Aviv, came at a time of high tension ahead of anniversary of Gaza border protests at the weekend. Israel has waged 3 wars on Gaza since Hamas took control of the territory in 2007. Netanyahu is running for re-election as Mr. Security, but his strategy in Gaza is also being questioned. However, US President Donald Trump's recognition of the Golan Heights, which it annexed from Syria, is supposed to be an election boost for Netanyahu.
This decision will bring a very significant prosperity to Golan Heights. There is no doubt that the Prime Minister operated professionally here, and I believe that the new government, when established, will make significant decisions in the same spirit.
Besides the issue of security, corruption is also an issue. In late February, Israel's Attorney General said that he would indict the Prime Minister on bribery, fraud, and breach of trust charges pending hearings. Netanyahu has also risked the support of moderate Israelis by fostering a deal between his far-right coalition partners and the extreme-right Jewish Power Party, so as to boost both chances of passing the 3.5% of the vote threshold required to enter parliament. Netanyahu has been in power for 3 consecutive terms since the year 2009, and he also led Israel from 1996 to 1999. He is hoping to surpass Israel's founder David Ben-Gurion as the longest-serving prime minister in the country's history. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. After weeks of angry protests, the streets of Algeria erupted again on 2nd of April, this time in celebration. President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who had clung to power for 20 long years, had at last stepped down. But who will replace Algeria's longest-serving president? The constitution says the Speaker of Parliament should be the interim leader until elections are held. But there are concerns over how long the transition will last, with protesters demanding a complete overhaul of the entire political system. Celebrations. Car horns heard in the streets of Algerian capital, Algiers, as hundreds of people celebrated the president's resignation. People waved Algeria's national flags and sang. This after Algeria's state media reported that President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who has been in power for 20 years, was resigning after a week of mass protests. Bouteflika handed over his resignation letter to head of Constitutional Council to step down from his position.
I went out to celebrate the resignation of Bouteflika. We have removed the biggest pin. God willing, we will have a 100% democratic transition. This is very important.
Pressure had been building since February, when the first demonstrations were sparked by Bouteflika's announcement that he would be standing in the upcoming elections for a 5th term. Tens of thousands of people protested across the country on 1st of March. In view of the protest, Bouteflika promised that he will not serve out a 5th term if re-elected. However, that, along with the change of Prime Minister, failed to quell the discontent. Protesters demanded Bouteflika to quit immediately. Then the powerful Algerian army also threw its weight behind the protesters, calling for the 82-year-old to be declared incapable of carrying out his duties. Algeria's Army Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Gaid Salah, who is also the Deputy Defence Minister and was seen as President's loyalist, gave his support to the demonstrators.
We have to find a solution that gets the country out of the current crisis and that responds to legitimate demands of the Algerian people. A solution that guarantees respect for the constitution.
A veteran of Algeria's War of Independence, Bouteflika came to office backed by the army after the 1990s civil war against Islamist insurgents, which left 150,000 people dead. He was largely viewed as a unifier of the many factions underpinning Algerian politics. His presidency even survived the protests of the Arab Spring in 2011. The ailing leader suffered a stroke 6 years ago and rarely appeared in public since. However, discontent against his rule grew in recent years. Meanwhile, after Bouteflika's resignation, the chairman of the upper house of parliament is expected to become caretaker president for 3 months until elections. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. US President Donald Trump on Thursday hinted the United States and China may be inching closer to finalizing a deal to end a year-long trade impasse between the world's two largest economic superpowers within weeks. This came after his meeting at the White House with the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, who has been in talks with the US negotiators this week in Washington. US and Chinese negotiators on Wednesday began their 9th round of talks to resolve their trade dispute. Former Nissan chief Carlos Ghosn has been re-arrested in Tokyo while out on bail pending trial over claims of financial misconduct. Prosecutors said the 65-year-old had been detained over suspicions that he caused Nissan $5 million in losses. Ghosn said that his re-arrest was outrageous and arbitrary, and his lawyer would strongly appeal against the arrest. Ghosn, who denies any wrongdoing, was recently released on bail after 108 days in custody. The world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, and his wife, McKinsey, have agreed a record-breaking divorce settlement worth at least $35 billion. McKinsey will retain a 4% stake in online retail giant Amazon, which her husband of 25 years founded. She will also give up her interest in the Washington Post newspaper and Bezos' space travel firm Blue Origin. The deal dwarfs a previous $3.8 billion record set by art dealer Alec Wilderstein and his wife. A whale was found with 40 kilograms of plastic in its stomach in the Philippines on Saturday, highlighting a stomach-churning effect of plastic pollution in the archipelago nation. The Cuvier's beaked whale was found emaciated and dehydrated in the shores near southern Philippines island of Mindanao. It had been vomiting blood before it died. Video of the necropsy showed sheets after bloody sheets of plastic pulled out of the whale's stomach. And now news on Brexit. British MPs have voted by a majority of 1 to force Prime Minister Theresa May to ask for an extension to the Brexit process. Now this in a bid to avoid any no-deal scenario. European Council President Donald Tusk says that he is ready to allow the UK a 12-month flexible extension to leave the European Union. However, other leaders of the European Union would need to agree to Tusk's plan at a summit next week. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Theresa May is meeting opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn to seek a compromise over reaching a Brexit deal, which has repeatedly been rejected by the British lawmakers. No breakthrough still over Brexit. Brexit continues to be mud in doubt nearly 3 years since the UK voted to leave the European Union. However, UK this week finally agreed on something related to Brexit. By the narrowest of margins, 1 vote, the House of Commons voted in favour of legislation which forces the UK government to request another extension to the Brexit process. The bill, which passed by 313 votes to 312, seeks to prevent Prime Minister Theresa May yanking the UK out of the European Union without an agreed deal. May has said that a further postponement to the Brexit date is needed if the UK is to avoid leaving the European Union without a deal. A scenario both EU leaders and many British MPs believe would create problems for businesses and cause difficulties at ports.
I know there are some who are so fed up with delay and endless arguments that they would like to leave with no deal next week. I've always been clear that we could make a success of no deal in the long term, but leaving with a deal is the best solution. So we will need a further extension of Article 50, one that is as short as possible and which ends when we pass a deal.
Prior to voting on the bill, May held talks with opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn in hopes of breaking the Brexit deadlock. So far, the entrenched hostility of hardline Brexiteers, an ally of May's party, has meant that May's Brexit deal would not pass in Parliament. This week, the Prime Minister accepted reality by offering instead to negotiate with Jeremy Corbyn. She and Corbyn now need to agree a proposal for MPs to vote on or before 10th of April, when EU leaders are expected to consider any extension request at an emergency summit. If they cannot, May has said that a number of options would be put to MPs to determine which course to pursue.
It is obviously different in that she's reaching out to the Labour Party, something that she should have done obviously 2 years ago. Having said that, I don't think Mr Corbyn is going to be any rush to make a deal with Mrs May, because I don't think he wants the Labour Party tarnished with the Brexit brush. They want the Conservative Party to own this Brexit deal, and then Labour will hopefully win an early election. That's the strategy for Mr Corbyn.
The UK was originally scheduled to exit the European Union on 29th of March. But since UK lawmakers failed to pass a withdrawal agreement before the deadline set by the British and European sides, the British government must make a new choice before 12th of April now to seek a longer-term delay or accept a no-deal Brexit.
Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's all in this edition of a World Panorama. But before we go, take a look at Asia's largest tulip garden, Indira Gandhi Memorial Tulip Garden in Srinagar. That was thrown open to the public on Sunday. Visitors from different parts of the country are flocking to the garden located in the foothills of the Zabarwan Hill. And this year, the visitors will get to see 51 varieties of tulips in the garden. Floodlights have also been installed in the garden to let the visitors experience the beauty of the garden even after sunset. So take a look at this colourful paradise. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week with another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.